we are having two experts, Dr. Johnny Agustin and Dr. Ilan Kelman. Ilan Kelman will be joining online at 11:30, and it will be a online session. And today we have Dr. Johnny Agustin from St. Ambrose University, Devonport. Actually, today we will be discussing, or it will be an interactive session, and we will be discussing on various aspects of environmental disaster and, of course, various policy aspects. You all are welcome to have this interaction with our experts. First of all, I would like to welcome Dr. Johnny Agustin on behalf of ECR Foundation, School of Environmental Sciences and Loyola College of Social Sciences to this webinar. Dr. Johnny Agustin is a professor at St. Ambrose University, Devonport, where he is currently teaching courses on social policy, comparative policy analysis, and empowerment-oriented social work practice. Dr. Agustin's current research focuses on the complex interactions between poverty, social policy, and disaster recovery. Professor Agustin is also a visiting professor at School of International Relations and Politics of Mahatma Gandhi University, and also serves as a chair for the Rajiv Gandhi Institute for Public Policy Studies at Mahatma Gandhi University. He did his PhD from University of Denver in social work and Masters of Philosophy from National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, Bangalore, and MSW from Sri Shankara Sanskrit University, Kerala. With all your permission, I would like to welcome Dr. Johnny Agustin to this webinar series. And also, I would like to welcome many participants, which is joined online, because it is from worldwide. Participants are there from Egypt, from Sri Lanka, from various other parts of the country also. So first of all, I would like to welcome all the participants who has joined online to this program. Also, I would like to welcome all the teachers, students, and research scholars who are present here, and all the other dignitaries who are online to this program. And I would welcome once more Dr. Johnny Agustin for your interactive session. Thank you.
You can use the same. Display about share this PPT, I think.
Okay.
Next.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you. Call me Johnny. I don't call me sir. Okay. And I want to thank Dr. Baiju and Dr. Subbu Sema and other participants here and the School of Environmental Sciences, as well as the School of Social Sciences at Loyola College and ECR Foundation, and Sihat for organizing this webinar and inviting me to be here to share my thoughts on environmental injustice under capitalism. Wonderful introduction by Dr. Baiju sir, and I am Johnny Augustine. I'm a faculty at the School of Social Work at St. Ambrose University in Davenport, Iowa. Been teaching there for the past 16 years from 2009 onwards. I did my master's here. Actually, I'm an alma mater of this Mahatma Gandhi University is my alma mater. I did my BSc Physics from St. Thomas College, so I have close connection with this university for a long period of time. Let me dive into the topic first. Today we are going to talk about one of the root causes of all the environmental catastrophes that we have been witnessing for the past several decades. So this is going to be the topics that I will be covering for the next 40 minutes, capitalism and injustice. I would like to focus on the energy consumption pattern in the global south as well as in the global north. Then I would like to discuss a little bit about exploitation that is happening around the world, the extraction of raw materials and labor from the global south towards the global north. And then I would offer my final thoughts and comments. If you have any questions in between, or if some of the concepts or thoughts are needs more clarification, please raise your hand. I'm more than happy to answer your questions. Now, one of the reasons why I would like to focus on capitalism, which is the predominant the model of the economy that we have in the world, practiced by numerous countries, is that it often breeds injustice in various forms. One of the most important aspects you must have noticed, day to day, you must have heard about the billionaires in the world, some of the most prominent billionaires like Elon Musk. So one of the richest man on planet Earth, has almost $400 billion of net worth, $400 billion. Now, why is that an injustice? Why is that an injustice? There are several researchers, several organizations that have tracked global inequality, and they have identified it's in the public domain. Anyone can access it. For example, World Inequality Database, anyone can access it. So when they analyzed the income and wealth inequality in the world, what they have found out, even in one of the richest countries on planet Earth, in the United States, Elon Musk has $400 billion of wealth, but he has more wealth than the bottom 50% of the population in the United States. United States is one of the richest countries on planet Earth. So the bottom 50% of the population in the United States, the US population is around 347 million. So 170 million people has less wealth than just one individual in that country, Elon Musk. How is that possible? How do our system allows that to happen? At the same time, we are told that there are less resources to be spent on people that needs basic human needs, and I'm going to talk about it later. For example, poverty. As we speak now, there are 50 million people in the United States live below the poverty line. 50 million people of the 347 million people live below the poverty line. And the poverty line is like, if you make $7.25 an hour, and if you make $1,100 per month, $16,000 a year, that means you are living in poverty. That's the situation. 50 million people live in poverty. So in one of the richest countries on planet Earth, 50 million people, as we speak, live below the poverty line. They have difficulty meeting their basic human needs. Second, homelessness. Any idea how many people live on the streets as we speak right now? It's night in the United States right now, around midnight. How many people sleep in the streets? Any rough wild guess? Anyone? I usually give 5 seconds for audience to answer. So 667,000 people live in the street. They don't have a roof over their head. Again, one of the richest countries in planet Earth. There are 667,000 people sleeps in the street. Why is that? I mean, there are numerous reasons behind that, and people argue that okay, it's a choice. I mean, homelessness is a choice. Actually, it's not a choice. It's actually a policy designed by the government, which again allows these billionaires to amass massive amounts of wealth, while at the same time criminalizing all kind of poverty, homelessness, drug addiction, etc., etc. Okay, so now the wealth and income inequality is so gross that there are 50 million people live below the poverty line, and now if you talk about if you earn 1 cent more than the poverty line. Like if you earn instead of $16,000, instead of $16,000, you earn $16,001. That means you are qualified as someone who lives above the poverty line. But again, their conditions are not going to be different, significant, right? If you have $1 more, there's nothing much you can purchase with that $1. Now, according to some research, it says that there are around 140 million people in the United States that are living paycheck to paycheck. 140 million people. That's almost, almost half of the US population. And why is that happening? It's an abomination. It's an abomination that is happening. Just one individual has $400 billion in net worth. So that's not confined just to the United States. If you look at globally, or if you look at India, yes, if you look at the World Inequality Database, you would notice that India has the inequality in India is much more gross than in the United States. India ranks second, I believe, in terms of income inequality, income and wealth inequality, and Saudi Arabia is number 1. Now, why is that? What is driving this wealth inequality? There are numerous things. So, but one thing I would like to focus is on perpetual economic growth imperative. Okay. So there is this mantra all the time. We talk about GDP. Okay. So India is growing at 8.2%. Okay. The US is growing at 2.5%. We need more economic growth. That's the only way that we can redistribute income, redistribute wealth, so that everyone's needs could be met. Now, is that true? India's GDP is growing at like 6.5% for the past several years. We still have how many million people live below the poverty line? How many million people lack access to electricity? I traveled to the northern part of India in 2022. What I have witnessed there is the conditions of people living in the rural India is literally horrible. They don't have schools, they don't have houses, they don't have nothing to survive on. Literally surviving on whatever crops that they have, if they have something to harvest. In spite of the massive floods and drought and everything that challenges them. So the mantra on perpetual economic growth, that GDP, it's not resulting in corresponding increase in standard of living for the masses, for the majority of the population anywhere in the world, India, United States, anywhere. Okay? For example, the statistics says shared before 50 million people live below the poverty line, despite United States as a constant positive GDP growth, as well as one of the richest countries on planet Earth. And so now the second thing is, even in the United States, I mean, India is moving in that direction. We have this idea of commodifying everything. Like everything is sold for a profit. Food is sold for a profit. Housing is sold for a profit. Healthcare is sold for a profit. Water, energy, everything is privatized to make sure that companies that own these commodities, they make profit out of it. Now, is that just? Like the things that we need to survive on, like food, the things that we need to survive on, like water, the things that we depend upon, like to breathe air, everything is commodified for a profit. And now the environmental impact of this, the perpetual narrative that we need to extract more resources from the environment. We need to grow the country's economy through the GDP percentage growth rate. But at the same time, so many people are living below the poverty line. They don't have their basic human needs met. I want to talk about healthcare. People need healthcare, right? If they feel sick, they want to see a doctor, they need to visit a hospital, right? Even today, even today in the United States, even after all kind of healthcare policy initiatives from the government, even after free healthcare for the low-income poor people from the government, there are 29 million people still living in the United States without having any healthcare because it is unaffordable for them to purchase any healthcare insurance. Again, one of the richest countries on the planet. Now, if capitalism could deliver prosperity, then these things wouldn't have happened in one of the richest countries and the bedrock of capitalism. The United States is considered as where the capitalism actually, flourished and progressed. Why is that? Because the ultimate goal of capitalism is profit. It's not about eliminating poverty. It's not about eliminating homelessness. It's not about protecting the environment. It's about how much profit you can amass from whatever resources that are available on this finite planet. We have only one planet, right? Well, we have plans to go to Mars, and I am not sure whether in your lifetime we are going to Mars, because we have only one planet right now where we live on. And that's not their concern at all. It's about amassing massive amount of wealth and at the peril of the remaining majority of the population. Now, I want to focus on energy consumption instead of GDP as one of the core indicators. Some economists, especially ecologically oriented economists, have analyzed the impact of energy consumption. And what they have identified is that per capita energy consumption is kind of correlated with growth. So in the global south, I mean, it's the countries in in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, and the global north is primarily the OECD countries, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and the European countries in the West. So their per capita in the global north, per capita energy use is around 130 gigajoules per year. Whereas in the global south, the countries that we live in right now, it's around 13.4 gigajoules. Now, why do they use that much amount of energy in the global north? And they use that primarily for fast fashion, SUVs like sport utility vehicles, private jets, yachts, industrial meat, and planned obsolescence. Like, for example, you have iPhone 4 and then now you have iPhone 17. Okay. In between this 10, 15 years, Apple has produced different versions of their iPhone, right? And why can't they use, remember the Nokia phone that you have had when I was a kid, that would last forever. If there is no need for maintenance, it would last forever. So why is iPhone, which is again cost immense money to buy, like almost 60,000 Indian rupees, close to 1,000 US dollars, that wouldn't last more than 3 or 4 years. What is the reason behind it? Because Apple cannot make profit. They cannot maintain their continue their profit-making strategy if they make an iPhone that lasts for 15, 20 years. Instead, they make sure that these iPhones are obsolete. They are not useful after a certain period of time. And again, these things add to the GDP. The more iPhones they make, the more iPads they make, the more computers they make, more electronic gadgets they make. These all add to the GDP. But it has nothing, there's some correlation, but it just, in a significant way, it has nothing to do with human well-being. It has nothing to do with planetary well-being. It's basically making sure that Apple as a company has a profit-making strategy and redistribute that profit to its shareholders. Whereas in the south, in the global south, as we speak, 780 million people doesn't have access to electricity. 3 billion struggling to meet decent living standards. You must be familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, right? SDG by the United Nations. According to them, the universal poverty threshold is somewhere around $1.95. I just want to ask you, what can you buy with $1.95, which is approximately 150 rupees? What can you buy with that in India or in Kerala? A coffee costs around 25 rupees, right? So you can buy 4 coffees. That's what you could buy. And then UN says that, okay, you're living above the poverty line if you make $1.95 per day. Okay, determination that we have that threshold. So even with that threshold, you see that around 3 billion people, even 3 billion people is making less than $1.95. In a planet where there are around 7 billion people, that's almost half of the population. They don't have that much money. And then we have this, just one individual or two individual or three individual has like billions of dollars, so trillions of dollars. They're predicting that Musk will be $1 trillion wealthy man in the next 10, 15 years. 38% of the global population use less than 10 gigajoules per year, which is again correlated to the basic meeting, their ability to meet basic human needs like food, water, clothing, shelter. These basic human needs, they cannot meet that. 38% of the global population. Again, we are talking about certain individuals amassing billions of dollars in wealth and income, and then we have the almost 1/3 of the population don't even have basic human needs met. And this is just for your thought. There is this debate over fuel wood, charcoal, and wood burning. The concerns over smoke. For environmentally conscious students and scholars like you might want to think, why is that we negatively highlight the impacts of fuel wood use while at the same promoting LPG use. And LPG is something that is coming out of fossil fuel. And okay, fossil fuel extraction, that is an environmentally harmful thing. If you frack the land, there is a carbon emission, and that is tied to global warming in numerous environmental studies. Now, what happens under the current system, under the current market model, is that this reproduction of inequality. If capitalism would have solved inequality, it would have solved this inequality a long time ago. And I'm certain that I'm of utmost conviction that it is not going to happen if we follow this model for the future. Now, in terms of extraction, by extraction I mean extraction of raw materials and resources, and raw materials and labor from the global south towards the global north. And during the colonial period, you are familiar with Indian history, right? The British came here, colonized our land for a certain period of time. Do you know in approximately how much amount of wealth they extracted from India in order to develop European nations? Any idea? There are some great studies from the JNU by Ulsa Patnaik, who actually translated that into dollars. It amounts to around $45 trillion. $45 trillion during the years of colonization of India. The Brits have actually transferred $45 trillion of wealth to the United Kingdom in order to fund all their projects, their infrastructure, their housing, their welfare, their everything. $45 trillion of wealth. I mean, this is just India. Okay, now we look at other countries. How many countries have the Europeans colonized? How much wealth they have extracted from these resources that they have extracted from these countries to their countries for their development, infrastructure, welfare, etc., etc. Now, Jason Hickel, Sullivan, and Snowboard, they have studied the extraction of raw materials and labor from the global south in 2021 for a period of from 1960 to 2018. So that's almost 58 years, almost 60 years of analysis, data that they had assessed. What they have found is that there was around $552 trillion of net appropriation of labor and raw materials from the global south towards the global north. $152 trillion. That's a huge amount from the global south to the global north. And that's the resource that they have used to fund their development projects, infrastructure, welfare system, etc., etc. In terms of raw materials, in 2015 alone, 10.1 billion tons of embodied raw material equivalent, which is equivalent to 50% consumption of the global north. So I want to give you the example of iPhone. Do you know where the raw materials required to manufacture iPhone comes from? From all over the world. It's not from the United States. It's the majority of the raw materials comes from all parts of the world. It's semiconductors, chips, all kind of stuff. And then once everything is finalized, it is assembled in a factory in China, Foxconn factory, or the factory, iPhone factory in Sri Perumbudur in Chennai. in Madras. They are shipped to California, and then they will redistribute that. Now, Apple make an astonishing profit out of that because the raw materials are cheap, the labor in China is cheap. There was actually in 2017 a study done by an expose by New York Times, which showed in China, in the Foxconn factory where Apple is assembled, manufactured, they made around 17 cents an hour, 17 cents an hour. Whereas if they had done the same thing, the assembly manufacture of iPhone in the United States at that time, they would have paid around $18 per hour wages for the workers who work in those plants. Does that make any sense? The reason why Apple is in China, the reason why Apple is in India is because of cheap labor. There is no other reason why they are in India. They are not fond of Indians. They don't want to, develop the infrastructure here. They don't want the well-being. They don't care about the well-being of Indians or Chinese anymore. What they care is how much profit they can amass from these endeavors and then transfer those profits back to their shareholders. That's the only thing that they think about. So in the 2017 expose, or even a couple of years ago, it's somewhere in the early last decade. So it shows that 17 cents an hour. Now these workers, they work around, like their shifts are like 3 24-hour shifts, like 72 hours continuously. These people work in the factory because they want to make sure that these things are produced at fast and then shipped to the United States. Do you remember the media story when Tim Cook actually shipped around $5 billion worth of, or $1 or $2 billion worth of iPhones right after Trump announced a tariff? Do you remember that? A couple cargo planes load of iPhones were shipped from India, from Sri Perumbudur to the United States in order to avoid the tariff. The reason is, again, maximizing profit. That's the agenda. Now, that means a transfer of, in 2015, 182 million person years of embodied labor. Like if one person works full-time for an year, that's 1 person a year of embodied labor. And that is transferred to the global north in order to feed the demands, needs of people living in the global north. Now, if you remember the history, again, conquest in the United States, I can speak authoritatively that, in the 1619, when the settlers came in, first thing that they did was they conquered the land. They needed the land. And then in order to cultivate the land, the first thing that they needed was labor. They didn't have enough labor to plant crops, tobacco or cotton or sugar or whatever they wanted to plant in their land. So what did they do? They bring labor from the global south, from Africa, to transatlantic slave trade. The slaves were bought, stolen from their land, uprooted from their land, brought through the ships, horrific conditions, and then sold. People who traded slaves, they made atrocious profits. And then these slaves were working in the plantations for almost 250 years without receiving any kind of remuneration. There were some studies that showed that in 1860, right before slavery was eliminated, slaves were freed, the slave labor contributed to almost 40% of the GDP, of the economic growth of the United States. Free labor. Slaves uprooted from Africa, brought to the United States, and then working in the plantations for free. All this means that people in the South, the environment in the South, the land in the South just served as raw materials for meeting the demands, the energy needs, or the consumption demands of people living in the global North. Now, exploitation. Suppression of wages in the global South. Okay, I want to, the actual statistics according to this study by Hickel et al. 2021, the wages in the global South for comparable jobs and qualifications, it is 1/5 of the northern wages. Okay. Now, I want to give the example of H-1B visa. Familiar with H-1B? This is where workers from India were, were allowed to migrate to the United States, and they have the opportunity to work in the United States. Now, people, when companies in the United States, I'm going to specifically talk about IT sector. If they work here, you know that the average monthly salary would be significantly low. And then once they move to the United States, Again, their salary, like they make around $70,000-$80,000 per year. But when compared to a student, a white student or a US citizen graduating from a US university with similar degree, employed at a similar institute, their salary is almost one-fifth of the wages that those folks earn from the same employer. Why is that? Why is that discrepancy? If these two people have the same qualification, same work they do, but they are paid differently. And again, companies like Wipro or Infosys or TCL, they make atrocious profit, allowing these folks to migrate, doing the businesses with the global north. That's one example. And then subsidized agricultural production in the north and land grabs by the multinational corporations. Now, every year in the US, agricultural production is subsidized by around $22 billion, which means the government provides subsidies to the big agro farmers so that they can make products, agri products cheap. What do they do with that if they have surplus agricultural production? And if you're following the news, you would understand that the issue between the Indian administration, the current Modi administration, and the Trump administration is regarding this agri products. The US wants to dump all their surplus agri products to India, but India wants to protect its farmers, and so there is this tariff battle between the two countries. Now, what happens is when subsidized agricultural products are dumped into countries in the global south, it literally displaces farmers. You know, the farmers who has 3 or 4 acres of land, they cannot compete with big agro companies like Monsanto or ADM. It's literally impossible. And I can give you an example from Mexico. Mexico is one of is our southern neighbor. There was a treaty signed between the United States, Canada, and Mexico in 1994. It's called North American Free Trade, or NAFTA agreement. And Bill Clinton actually signed it, and Bill Clinton, during the signing of the bill, said it's going to bring prosperity to people in Mexico and Canada into the United States. What actually it did was, it was dumping of surplus agricultural products from the United States to the Mexico, which displaced all the agro farmers. You know, the Mexican farmers are like, they own like 3 or 4 acres of land, just like the folks here, and they couldn't compete with the Monsanto, dumping corn and soybean into their country, which means they had to shut down their operation. They had to close their farms and move to the cities for seeking for minimum wage jobs. And then it also allowed multinational companies to move to these countries and then grab their land. In the United States, we don't grow banana or coffee because the environment is not conducive for growing banana or coffee or anything. But many of the multinational companies, like for example, United Fruit, they have changed their name because United Fruit has a negative name labeling attached to it, so change their name to Chiquita. But why did they change their name is that they have owned millions of acres of agricultural land in South America, especially in Guatemala, El Salvador, that area where banana could be grown. Now, they purchased this land. They own everything, including the transportation. They own the government as well. And then transport those banana to the United States, where there's a huge consumption of banana, and they make atrocious profit out of it. But at the same time, the people who are working in those banana plantations, they are paid minimum wages or less than minimum wage. Or if anyone protests, organize an agricultural movement or a unionization movement, either they will be killed or literally destroyed. And these big companies actually do that. So in Mexico, after the NAFTA, there is this Zapatista movement against the land grab by the multinational corporations in Mexico. So it's happening all over the world. Then inflated prices in the north. You are familiar with the COVID-19 and the subsequent vaccine redistribution. How many countries had access to vaccine? How many countries didn't have access to vaccine? If you look at the continent of Africa, the majority of the African population was unvaccinated because they didn't have access to vaccine, right? And the Western countries, they had access to vaccine. And then Bill Gates, one of the richest billionaires, don't idolize him, when he was asked in the public about, okay, are you willing to waiver the patent for the COVID vaccine? Can you guess his response? He said, no, shouldn't waive the patent. and which means unnecessarily millions of people would die of COVID. I mean, that's not an isolated phenomenon. I can give another example of HIV. It's the triple cocktail drug. Remember, the countries that are hugely impacted by HIV/AIDS were not the United States, but the countries like India, Thailand, Brazil, South Africa. Like millions of people were infected with HIV/AIDS. So in the US, the pharmaceutical industry, I don't know the exact, maybe Pfizer or Eli Lilly, one of those companies that identified the drug that could treat HIV, the triple cocktail drug at that time, which would cost around $16,000 per year at that time. This is late 1990s, $16,000 per year. Now, a person living in India, is there a way that they could afford $16,000 per year? Literally impossible in 19 years. You cannot even think about it. So, which means they cannot act. We know that there is a drug that will treat HIV. That means you can live, you can treat that disease. You can live longer, but these companies that literally denied the countries like India, Thailand, South Africa, Brazil, etc., to develop a generic drug to treat HIV/AIDS. But again, the government of India fought. These countries actually fought, and then they finally produced a generic drug, which they sold at a price of $200, $300 per year, which is affordable for those people living in those countries. And then hepatitis C is another example. To treat someone with hepatitis C, in the US, it would cost around $88,000 for a 12-week course treatment. $88,000 for a 12-week. So how many of you can afford that? I mean, $88,000. It's literally impossible, right? Again, the government of India, they had the generic drugs, which is around India, it would cost around $1,000 per year. So these prices are inflated. But again, people living in the global south would not actually afford these highly inflated prices. Now, what is the role of the international financial corporations on this, like IMF, World Bank, etc.? Literally, allowing these countries in the global south, or making these countries in the global south to provide a red carpet welcome for the multinational corporations. That's their role, essentially. And of course, I talked about the export-oriented crops. Like instead of growing things that sustain the lives of people in those countries, countries are now focusing on crops that they can grow and export. Like, in Brazil, they grow coffee so that they can export it to the United States or the countries in the West. Some countries grow banana so that we can export. Like tea, in India, we grow tea. I always tell my friends in the US that, I get a quality tea only when I am in the US, which is actually grown in the Harrison tea plantations in Munnar. You don't get it. You don't get the export quality tea because it is unaffordable for you. You get the waste, whatever is left, we get that. But the quality ones were sold in countries in the West. And then why are they militarizing the borders? You must have seen the Europe is closing their borders, shutting down the borders to people from Africa, and the US is shutting down their borders in the South. Everywhere the nations are closing their borders for immigrants. If it is a free market, they should have opened the border. If that's like the capital is allowed to flow all over the world, why can't they open the borders for people from other countries to migrate each other? And the reason is that if there is labor mobility, if I can freely move from here to the United States, and people from the United States could freely move from there here, that means at the end, there will be an equilibrium. The wages will be almost similar in here, there. So they don't want that to happen. That's the reason behind this militarization of borders. The labor in the South should stay cheap as possible. And the labor in the South, that it is almost 5 times as the wages in the South. So that they can maintain their higher standards of life. Here, the standards of life is always below the standard. Now, there are some solutions to it. Instead of embracing capitalism, there are alternative economic systems. One of the things that I recommend is social solidarity economy. There was a UN task force in 2016. They invited scholars from all over the world who is working on alternative economic system, which is based on solidarity, cooperation, and mutualism instead of competition. Capitalism is all about compete and competition and making profit. Here it's all about solidarity, it's all about cooperation, it's about mutualism. How can we grow together so that if I am better, you are better, we are all better as a society? So equity in all dimensions, race, ethnicity, gender, class, sexual orientation. There is no discrimination. It's an ideal vision for a planet, for a nation, for a society to grow. Participatory democracy. There was actually a study. Folks say that the United States is a democracy. I challenge that. It's actually an oligarchy. Musk and Tim Cook and Bill Gates, they actually determines the policy. There's actually a study completed by Professors Gylens and Page, published in the Journal of Politics in 2014. They analyzed almost 15 years of US policy. Around 3,000 policies passed by the Senate, House, and signed by the President. And what they have found is that people's voice, like your voice, my voice, doesn't have any say in any of the policies passed. It's basically the billionaires, they write the policy, they get it passed. Can give an example, like people, the majority of the people, 68–70% of the people in the US, they want universal healthcare. They want universal healthcare, like everyone, like what they have in the United Kingdom or what they have in Canada. But US doesn't have a universal healthcare. In the state of Missouri, how many minutes do I have? 15 minutes, okay. So in the state of Missouri, one of the states, 50 states in the US, recently there was an election. You are familiar with the recent presidential election, Trump won. And the state of Missouri, they had a ballot initiative. And the ballot initiative was to provide living wage for Missouri. The people living in Missouri should be provided with a living wage, like not much, but $15, $16 an hour. So that means that's the public's demand. That it's like a referendum. Ballot initiative is like a referendum. The whole people in the state would actually vote for it, and they wanted a living wage. Now the state assembly, the legislative assembly, the governor, they're all colluding together to make that ballot initiative void, so that Missouri, the state of Missouri, still have $7.25 minimum wage. My point here is your voice doesn't matter. It's a government run by oligarchy. Noam Chomsky always says that's not a democracy, but it's a plutocracy. But there are countries, like there are numerous examples, like Kerala is one example, the way Kerala eradicated extreme poverty just recently, which is commendable, which is really commendable. And you have to actually look at the process through which Kerala accomplished that. The same thing happened in China. In 2013, Chinese Prime Minister, Chinese President, actually wanted to eliminate extreme poverty in China by 2020. And they have accomplished that, which is, I mean, it's not from the report from China. Of course, there is a report from China, but World Bank, IMF, and other international scholars, poverty researchers actually agree with that. They eliminated extreme poverty in China in 2020. Kerala did exactly the same thing. So if you look at the process by which China accomplished that, Kerala accomplished that, it is through participatory democracy at the grassroots level. People come together, they identify their problems, issues, their needs, their demands, and then they come up with solutions, and the government actually support those solutions rather than imposing top-down solutions from the at the federal level, at the central level. So the grassroots organizing, people participation, and then identifying and trying to solve the problems these communities face. Such solutions are actually sustainable. Such solutions actually respect the environment, respect the planet, so that we have a planet, a sustainable planet, a safe planet to pass down to the next generation. And regardless of any of those things, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach by the social and solidarity economy. It's tailored to the needs of every community, and that's why it's extremely important for local communities to actually participate in this democratic process, so that they can identify what their problems are and what their strengths and capabilities are, and then deliver solutions to their problems. And the focus of this system is people and planet first, and we want to respect the well-being of people as well as the planet. Now it's easily said than done, because there will be resistance from the upper class, the rich billionaires, who doesn't want to give away their right, literally the right to fly private jets, chartered flights, yachts, etc., etc. Now, if the government is interested in the well-being of the people, the local or state or federal government, they should scale down excess production and then focusing on things that are actually needed by the society. What are the things needed by the society? What are the things that we need to survive, right? We need food. We need to produce food for our survival. Okay, and respecting the planet, not genetically modified or the farming that requires a lot of pesticides, etc., but a solution of agriculture that respects the land. And then people in the north, as I said before, it's 130 gigajoules of energy consumption per year. And that is used again for to fund their extravaganza, like flying on private jets or say on yachts, etc. They need to scale down that. Instead, focus on meeting the basic human needs like food, clothing, shelter, housing, etc. Initiatives by the government should, focus on attaining the basic standards of living. Now, if you cannot meet the basic standards of living, if you cannot provide food for everyone to eat, if we cannot provide housing for everyone to live in, if we cannot provide healthcare for people who all need healthcare, then what is the point? What is the point? Are we concerned just about the well-being of the ultra-rich, or are we concerned about the well-being of the entire global population? By population, I mean not just people sitting in this room, people in other states, people living in other countries, in Africa, in Asia, in North America, everywhere. I mean, they're your fellow human beings. Their well-being is your well-being. And again, as I said, patent is one of the major issues of transferring technology from the global north to the global south. And patents is again something that is invented by the big businesses, big multinational corporations, so that they have the exclusive right to manufacture, produce the same thing, and others are denied that basic right, like treatment of diseases like COVID or HIV. If they don't have patent to manufacture those drugs, people will die, eventually die. So get rid of those patents and make sure that things that are needed for basic human survival, that shouldn't be patented. That should be something that should be protected by the government. Government should take the responsibility to provide those services to the people. Debt cancellation. As I said before, almost $152 trillion of wealth has been transferred. Embodied labor and resource materials has been transferred from the global south to the north. So they should compensate for it. Like the $45 trillion wealth that's been extracted from India and then sent to the Europeans, they should compensate for that, for the development of, there are numerous ways of doing that. It's called reparation, and some political scientists, economists, sociologists, social scientists, all are working on that. What are the right way of providing reparations for the harms that's been caused by colonization? And this is possible if the government, the citizens participate in their government, they participate in the democracy, and the government provides a sustainable funding for such initiatives in the community. Those programs will be sustainable. I think I have 5-10 minutes for questions and answers. Questions? I told Vaiju sir initially that I would love to have an interactive session, but again, he suggested me to provide a brief lecture first so that the audience could be.
Yeah, please. So I will just start with. So what is an alternative for this capitalism actually?
And that's one thing that I actually suggested, social and solidarity economy model, where the basic principle of the social and solidarity economy system is, instead of competition, it is cooperation. instead of profit, the goal is human well-being. And Peter Otten has published extensively on this social and solidarity economy approach for a long period of time. And a classic example I can share from India is AMUL, Varghese Kurien's project. Are you familiar with that? What do you know about AMUL? Anyone? How many people are actually employed by AMUL, that company? What is so special about AMUL? What is so special? Okay. Now, what is so important about AMUL is that all the profits that's been earned through the selling of the products, the milk, the dairy products, everything is redistributed back to the employees and their families. Almost 85%, my number may be slightly little off, but close to 85, between 85 to 90% of the profit earned by that company is redistributed back to the employees. So people who are actually working will receive a decent wage, which again, you know, the ripple effect of that. You know, a women working in that organization, they receive that much income, which could be spent on their kids' education, maybe building their house, a safe house, or expanding a business, or whatever they want, or buying some ornaments for the wedding, marriage of their daughters, anything that they can do. So the profit is earned, is redistributed back to the people, so that people are well off, rather than one individual amassing massive amounts of wealth. So it's literally like owning the means of production, which is the ultimate goal of communism, which is possible. And AMUL has demonstrated that. And my understanding is that around 1.4 million people are employed by AMUL. So there are numerous such cooperative societies that exist in the world. And this UN task force in 2016, their goal was to bring together all these different groups and organizations that are working together to improve the well-being and the life of people all over the world, rather than just focusing on the World Economic Forum, which again, it's a group of billionaires coming together and discusses what is best for them, rather than what is best for the majority of the people living in this planet, as well as for the planet. So social and solidarity economy is one thing that I suggest. I mean, the ultimate goal is, again, communism. When we hear the word communism, we think that it's Russia or China. I mean, none of those countries are actually communist countries. China has a very highly capitalistic state, but again, economy controlled by the state. State actually dictate the policy, but it's highly capitalist economy. No worker own anything in China. What I'm trying to suggest is that where workers, they own the means of production. They are the ones who are actually contributing their labor, and they are the ones who are actually reaping the profit, whatever they earn from that system. And social and solidarity economy actually allows that, because the ultimate goal is to enhance human well-being rather than making profit or any initiatives. And it works through cooperation, it's worked through mutualism. And you could actually do that. I mean, you don't have to, a social scientist or a scholar to actually do that. In the US, there are numerous, hundreds of thousands of mutual aid organizations. Mutual aid organizations. Do you know what mutual aid is? It's simple. If there is a need in the community, like for example, there was a disaster that happened in Churalmara, last year, right? Exactly almost 1 year ago. And people are in dire need for so many things. They need a shelter, they need food, they need clothing. Then the entire community come together, and whatever they have in excess or surplus, they share with others that need. So in the US, if there is a tornado, if there is a hurricane or something, numerous organizations, they come together, and then they have like a website, like a Facebook or whatever, and then they share if there's a need in the community. Someone needs a tarpaulin sheet, or someone needs a space heater. And there is someone there is a space heater in their home unused. So they will drop that off to that person who are in need. There's no need for any funding or anything. It's basically something that happens instantaneously, spontaneously to an arising need or a crisis in the community. So historically, I talked about slavery. During the slavery time period, the black population in the United States, they didn't have much resources or supported from the masters or from the government. So instead, they relied on mutual aid. So people come together, the black community, they come together and they share whatever they have so that they support each other. And it doesn't require government funding or anything. And I think it's something that could be done anywhere in the world. Community gardening is another example. People come together, they garden together. Whatever they grow, they share with each other. They contribute to the labor, the seed, whatever organic fertilizers that they use. They share that, and then they share the produce among themselves. Yes.
Told about this mutual aid. In the 2018 Kerala floods, the same idea was implemented by the Kerala government. They called for the products for these purposes like medical goods, food, clothing, equipment, and everything. But later, the people use this as a chance to spend or to dump their unused products or the products which are having some complaints or something like that. They use this chance to dump those products, and the government had this extra burden of to check whether it is a quality product or an extra people were needed for sorting out these products, and these waste products also added up to the extra waste dump. So it was also an issue.
Sure. I mean, that's not just confined to the 2018 flood. I did my research in the tsunami survivors back in 2004. I mean, there was a huge need for external support at that time. And then folks from the Western world, they dumped all their unused materials, clothing, everything to the folks in Alapad, in Karunapalli. I mean, many of the folks, even people living in the shelters at that time, said, we are not used to wearing these attire, like the apparels from the West. What they need is a churidar or a sari. That's what they actually need. Or they were comfortable in whatever clothes they were wearing during the disaster, rather than wearing a Western style. I mean, that's an issue. I mean, there are challenges. I mean, I'm not saying that these are solutions without any challenges. There are challenges, but again, mutual aid works through groups. I mean, it's a group of people coming together. They share their challenges and they identify ways to sort out those challenges. But this is not an excuse that, okay, there are unused or unusable items that's been shared. Okay, now let's dump mutual aid. No, the solution is groups coming together. How can we solve this out? How can we better this program next time? So they come together, they deliberate, engage in a dialogue, and make sure that next time it happens, they don't collect these unused items. I mean, the Kerala government or the NDMA, National Disaster Management Agency, right now has such a policy that they don't accept those things from the Western world. I mean, the United Nations, as well as other international humanitarian organizations, actually recommend that. So it's again learning from our past mistakes so that those mistakes are not repeated. But that's not an excuse to just dump such a program, such an initiative that actually works in delivering help to the majority of the people who actually need it. Any other questions? Yes.
Hello, Professor. Can you hear me?
About the commercialization of renewable energies or the so-called green environmental solutions. While considering an example of the wind turbines, which are often marketed as a green energy solution, whether the reality is their environmental impact is so far from that. So, are we really underestimating the resources that are used for the creation of one single turbine, and which they didn't consider whether it is effective or not in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. I mean, you're the environmental science students. You should tell me the answer about the wind turbine. I mean, we have a president who actually said that a wind turbine actually causes cancer. Not so sure about that. But again, we don't want to have a global solution to local problems. What we want is local solutions to the local problems. If the energy consumption is the need for P. Sainath actually wrote significantly about that. If you know, P. Sainath is a well-known social activist in India. So in one of his books, what he wrote is that if you go to a mall like Lulu Mall, you go to Lulu Mall. What do you see there? Like that entire mall is highly illuminated. It's like wonderful. It's great experience for kids, for everyone who goes there. My kids went there. They said it's wonderful. It's beautiful. You go there, but it is 24/7 illuminated. While at the same time, I talked a little while ago, 780 million people in the world, they don't have access to electricity. I have one of my sisters who live in the rural areas in Kannur district. They still don't have electricity. In Kerala, I mean, they have electricity, but in between. But what I'm trying to say is that we have solutions, but at the same time, we are proportionally these solutions actually disproportionately benefits people who are in the top 1% or top 10% of the population. Like for example, the big businesses. I don't know why these things have to be open 24/7 like Lulu Mall or anything. So that's exactly the same thing in the US. You see that the Manhattan or the Fifth Avenue, you see the entire city illuminated 24/7. But then there are rural United States where they don't even have plumbing. They don't even have plumbing. Like if you go to the reservations, and I usually travel to the southwestern Colorado. There are Navajo reservation, Ute reservation. So if you go to the community, some of the houses they don't even have plumbing. That means they don't have toilet, or the waste collects there, rodent infestation, everything. My point here is, if there is a local need for energy consumption, identify what is locally compatible and reducing waste, reducing consumption to make sure that all people have access to those things.
But it is often said that even if it starts tomorrow, it will take an estimated 30 years to have an alternative solution. So, we are not sure what even if we find one.
Anyone want to answer that? Like it take another 30 years to have our energy consumption needs met. I mean, in terms of technology, this is what I'm saying. In the northern countries, 130 gigajoules of energy consumption per capita per year. That is excess. I mean, that is used to fund, that is used to do all these fast fashion, sport utility vehicles, etc., etc. Now, reducing those consumption, and there is a global policy like the Paris Climate Agreement. I mean, if you look at the Paris Climate Agreement, it has policies that make sure that we need to reduce the carbon emission in order to make sure that the planet is safe to live for the next 30, 40 years, so that other countries, especially countries in the global south, which are disproportionately impacted by the excess carbon emissions from the countries in the global north. So reducing consumption, energy consumption in the global north is one strategy. But at the same time, promoting renewable energy consumption in terms of technology transfer, they have the technology to do that. I mean, which technology to use, it is again a debate, a discourse, a dialogue among scholars and environmental scientists. I'm not an expert to comment on that, but again, it is possible.
Can I speak, sir? Shibu here.
From online. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm Shibu from Christ University, Bangalore. A few things. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Well, I can hear you. I can.
Okay. Yeah. Shibu here. I'm from Bangalore. One of the thing, the spending time at the grassroots is very costly. It takes a lot of energy, money. For example, last few weeks, a week back, I visited 6 districts in Karnataka. There was a scheme, lift irrigation schemes, which consume a lot of electricity, but 6 or 7 districts have been transformed based on our understanding. The farmers are getting benefited. So, and that is point number 1. So, there are a lot of cases positively are coming from, because the welfare state is thinking. Of course, there will be corruption, there are other things. So, we have seen marginal and the medium farmers are getting benefited very heavily, and they are not paying even 1 penny to as tax. So that is the situation, and electricity consumption is very high. This is one situation. Second, I have a course on ESG, environment, social, and governance. So many companies are looking at circular economy, and that is the reality. So in India, small companies, big companies, they are looking at it. So it may take some time. That's what my feeling is, because I'm saying that these are the realities when we look into the field. Third one is, see, I really don't think there are many worldviews existing within. it's, for example, India. There are a lot of worldviews exist. Socialism, everything exists. Different religious isms. So these are all complications. So marking one country as a target may be a little dangerous. There will be people of good, stewards of things everywhere. These are my comments, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. But I actually, you can turn off the mic. I can hear. Well, yes. I actually worked in Bangalore, and I studied at NIMHANS, National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, Bangalore, which is near the Derry Circle. And then, when I was studying in 1999 to 2001, and then subsequently I worked as a consultant in the community mental health department for 2 years. So Bangalore, Derry Circle is like, it's almost heart of the city. And if you travel at that time, 16 kilometers from Derry Circle to the rural Karnataka, 16 kilometers. If you travel 16 kilometers, it's rural Karnataka. I mean, it's totally different now, but at that time, it's rural Karnataka. So we had an off-campus site in Sagalwara. It's a village like of 70 households, poor, very poor people. I mean, they had, the only thing that they grow is like ragi. You know that ragi, right? And so I had the freedom. And I had the opportunity to be with those households for almost 2 years. I could go to any of those households for 2 years, anytime, day, night, anything, because I literally lived in that community. I didn't sleep in those villages, but morning 6 o'clock I went there, came back around 6 p.m. at night. My point is, morning breakfast for kids, ragi mudda and a gravy. Lunch for kids, ragi mudda and a gravy. Dinner for kids, ragi mudda and a gravy. That's the only thing that they have. It's nutritious food. I'm not saying that. It's a highly nutritious food, but they don't have any variety. They don't have any choice. They had an elementary school in that village, very close to village, 1 to 5th grade, for 4th grade, one teacher. And that teacher comes from Bangalore city. There is only one bus. If that bus doesn't run, that means there is no teacher in that school. This is 2001, 2002, that time period. No teacher. So literally, I and some of the nurses that work with me, when a teacher is absent, we are the ones who actually taught those kids. But again, I'm a Malayalam. I didn't know Kannada. So how do you do that? It's like literally dancing between two languages. I could speak broken Kannada. My point is, at that time, this is almost 20 years ago, 16 kilometers from Bangalore, the heart of Bangalore, you see poverty. People living in abject poverty. And so we need interventions which actually target the rural population. And I am someone of the opinion that they don't have to contribute. I mean, if they contribute, that's nice. But if people don't have the ability to contribute to the process, that's perfectly fine. Because we all know that if you look at the Indian statistics, almost 77% of the Indian population live in those villages. And if you don't uplift those people living in those villages, I don't see a possibility for India as a whole to grow. You can talk about the Adanis and the Lulu Mall and everything as a sign of progress. But if you travel to the rural villages of India, I mean, I traveled to Gwalior. You know Gwalior, right? Gwalior is one of those great cities. The Scindias ruled that area for a long period of time. Even if you move just 50 meters from the palace, it is poverty. 50 meters from the palace, you will see total poverty. This is 2022, 3 years ago. So there are ways that we can strengthen the rural economy, and even if the farmers didn't contribute, it's the responsibility of the state and the local governments to promote their participation as well as promote their well-being.
Yeah, sir, that's what I'm also saying. And it's not a complaint.
Aspect, because maybe this participated other than Kerala, is there any initiative going on?
Of course. Now, I just don't want to focus on China alone. I mean, China is a classic example. If you look at, I can share the documents that from 2013 to 2020, how they actually eliminated extreme poverty. There is actually different studies that's been published. Actually, New York Times had an article which should be available in the public. It's vaguely titled. I don't know exactly. House and Salman Farhan. That's how they titled that article, which is about how China eradicated extreme poverty. And towards the end of that, New York Times commented whether this is sustainable. That's the question, because it costs a lot of money from the federal government to actually eradicate extreme poverty. The question that they have raised towards the end is whether it is sustainable. I mean, if you eradicate extreme poverty, I mean, that's a major accomplishment. It's not the sustainability of everything. It's about, how we can improve the well-being. Now, I just don't want to focus just on China. Now, look at the Scandinavian countries, like, for example, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, which is, again, countries in the global west, part of the OECD countries. I mean, in those countries, it's literally the municipalities. It's literally the municipalities that are deciding what is best for the community. Healthcare is managed by the municipality. Childcare is managed by the municipality. Healthcare benefits are managed by housing benefits are managed by the municipalities. So at the municipality, which is at the local level, like panchayats here, people come together, they discuss, they identify their needs and solutions, and then they try to identify resources to address those solutions. These are in Scandinavian countries. Now, there is challenge to that. When Hillary Clinton, when he ran in 2016 against Donald Trump, she was asked, are you going to emulate the Norwegian model in the United States? The Norwegian model has universal healthcare. Every people in Norway has access to healthcare. She was asked, and the immediate answer from Hillary Clinton was that the United States is not Norway. The United States is the United States. So that actually meant the politicians, the political leadership didn't have the motive or incentive to actually implement a universal healthcare program, because their primary constituents are the billionaire class. They're the ones who actually contribute their election campaign. Okay? The last presidential election was like $16 billion or something. $16 billion in a presidential election. Can you imagine that? So it's the dollars that speaks, not people's voices. $16 billion. So if you have $1 billion, you can actually buy a president. And that's the president that the United States have right now. Yes. Oh, you
example ആയിട്ട് നമ്മളെ പറയുന്നത് യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റി ഒരു ഇൻഡസ്ട്രീസ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ എന്താ പറയുക ഒരു സ്ലേവറി പറയുന്നത്. ഇപ്പം കേരളത്തിന്റെ കാര്യം എടുക്കുവാണെങ്കിൽ തന്നെ കേരളത്തിൽ പോവർട്ടി എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു. അപ്പം നമുക്ക് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഈ ക്യാപിറ്റലിസം കാരണം തന്നെയാണ് ഇപ്പൊ ക്യാപിറ്റലിസത്തെ എന്താ പറയുക തീവണ്ടിയിലാണെങ്കിലും അല്ലെങ്കിൽ എലോൺ സാർ പറഞ്ഞ എലോൺ മസ്ക് തന്നെയാണ് ഇവരെ ഏറ്റവും കൂടുതൽ ഫിലാന്ത്രപ്പി ചെയ്യുന്ന ആൾക്കാർ തന്നെയാണ്. ഇവർ സ്കോളർഷിപ്പിൽ തന്നെ പഠിക്കുന്ന പിള്ളേർ തന്നെയുണ്ട്. അവർ തന്നെയാണ് ഏറ്റവും കൂടുതൽ MIT പോലെ ഇൻസ്റ്റിറ്റ്യൂട്ടിൽ പഠിക്കാറുണ്ട്. ഇപ്പം എന്താ പറയുക സാർ പറഞ്ഞു കമ്മ്യൂണിസം അല്ലെങ്കിൽ സോവിയറ്റ് യൂണിയൻ ഒക്കെ പറയുന്നത് കമ്മ്യൂണിസം അല്ല, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അവിടെ എക്സാക്ട് കമ്മ്യൂണിസം അല്ലെങ്കിൽ പറയുമ്പോൾ തന്നെ അവിടെ ഇപ്പൊ കമ്മ്യൂണിസ്റ്റിന്റെ അടിയിൽ തന്നെ എൻവയോൺമെന്റ് ഇൻഡസ്ട്രീസ് വന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. സ്റ്റാലിൻ ആണെങ്കിൽ തന്നെ എന്താ പറയുക മാനിയ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അവരും അവരുടേതായ വിഷൻ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അവരുടേതായ ഫേവറിറ്റിസമാണ് ആ കൺട്രീസ് നടക്കുന്നത്. അപ്പൊ ക്യാപിറ്റലിസം ആണ് പ്രോബ്ലം, അത് എത്തിക്സ് ആണ് പ്രോബ്ലം.
Great question. Now, I want to start with Elon Musk funding philanthropical projects. Now, you might want to look at how much tax Elon Musk paid in the past several years. You might want to check how much tax they paid, Amazon, Jeff Bezos paid in the past several years. You want to check how many taxes they paid, Amazon or Elon Musk or Bill Gates, many of these companies, how much they paid. There are numerous analyses on that. There are certain years in the United States where Amazon paid zero taxes. Now, when they make billions of dollars in profit and they don't pay any tax in relation to the profit that they make, they can contribute as much money as they want in terms of the philanthropic projects. I mean, that's their choice. But at the same time, make use of all the infrastructure that is developed by the government. So they should pay a fair share of the taxes. If it is 20%, they should pay 20% taxes. When as an employee, as a worker, I pay 20% taxes, I pay 30% taxes. So anyone who works, they contribute to the government, and that revenue is used for developmental projects. But these big philanthropists, as you talk about, they don't pay fair share of their taxes, and that's a major concern for revenue in countries in the global West. Now, when there is less revenue, when there is decline in revenue, that's when we speak about the scarcity myth. Okay, we don't have enough resources to fund a welfare state. We don't have enough resources to provide healthcare for people who are less well off. I mean, that's an abomination when we know that these folks, they actually should pay tax. They haven't been paying taxes, but average workers, they are paying taxes. Then that's actually a problem. That's a big ethical question, as you said. Now, I'm not idolizing China. I'm not idolizing Russia. I'm not idolizing India or the Western world. What I'm trying to say here is that the goal of a prosperous society is the well-being of every human being. I mean, India has a population of around 1.4 billion people. You talked about the unemployment rate. It's 19% or something, if I remember correctly, which is stunningly high. But are there ways to address this unemployment? There are policy solutions which again requires a collaboration, not competition. Collaboration from big businesses, small businesses, political leadership to make sure that this unemployment issue is addressed. I mean, if capitalism is the solution, these problems wouldn't have happened, first of all. Okay, I can take one more question and then we wrap it.
ഈ വെസ്റ്റേൺ കാര്യം പറഞ്ഞല്ലോ, ഇപ്പം USA ആണെങ്കിലും അവിടെ പോപ്പുലേഷൻ കൂടുതലാണ്, ഇന്ത്യ ആണെങ്കിലും ഇവിടെ പോപ്പുലേഷൻ കൂടുതലാണ്. പക്ഷേ ഈ നോർത്ത് കൺട്രീസ് സ്കാൻഡിനേവിയൻ കൺട്രീസ് എടുക്കുകയാണെങ്കിൽ അവിടെ പോപ്പുലേഷൻ കുറവാണ്, കൺട്രോൾ ചെയ്യാൻ എളുപ്പമാണ്. അപ്പം പോപ്പുലേഷൻ അല്ലേ റീസൺ. അതിപ്പം ഈ നോർത്ത് കൺട്രീസ് ഫോളോ ചെയ്യണമെന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ പോലും ഇത്രയും പോപ്പുലേഷൻ യൂണിവേഴ്സൽ ഹെൽത്ത് കെയർ കൊടുക്കുക എന്നുള്ളത് വളരെ ബുദ്ധിമുട്ടുള്ള കാര്യമാണ്. ഇപ്പൊ കേരളത്തിലെ നമുക്കിപ്പോ ഫ്രീ യൂണിവേഴ്സൽ ഹെൽത്ത് കെയർ ഉണ്ട്, ഫ്രീ എഡ്യൂക്കേഷൻ ഉണ്ട് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ അതിന്റെ ഒരു എന്താ പറയുക എസെൻസ് എത്താന്നുള്ളത് നോക്കണം. ഇപ്പം കേരളത്തിൽ തന്നെ എടുത്താൽ തന്നെ ഹെൽത്ത് എടുത്താൽ തന്നെ ആർക്കാണ് ഇവിടെ ഏറ്റവും കൂടുതൽ പ്രാധാന്യം കൊടുക്കുന്നത്? ഇൻ കേസ് ഒരു പൊളിറ്റീഷ്യൻ ഗവൺമെന്റ് ഹോസ്പിറ്റലിൽ പോയി കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ അവർക്കാണ് പ്രാധാന്യം, ഒരു സാധാരണക്കാരൻ പോകുമ്പോഴാണ് പ്രാധാന്യം. അതേ ഹെൽത്ത് ഫെസിലിറ്റി ആണ് ഇവിടുത്തെ ഒരു പ്രൈവറ്റ് ഹോസ്പിറ്റലിൽ കിട്ടുന്നത്. ഒരു പ്രൈവറ്റ് ഹോസ്പിറ്റലിൽ പോയാൽ തന്നെ അറിയാം അത് എന്തോരം എഫിഷ്യന്റ് ആണെന്നുള്ളത്. അപ്പം ഈ ഒരു ഡീഗ്രോത്ത് മെത്തേഡ് എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ മറ്റേ ഹിക്കൽ എന്നൊക്കെ പറഞ്ഞാൽ ഡീഗ്രോത്ത് മെത്തേഡ് വല്ലാണ്ട് പ്രൊമോട്ട് ചെയ്തതാണ്. ഈ ക്യാപിറ്റലിസം അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ആ പ്രൈവറ്റൈസേഷൻ ഒരു ബെനിഫിറ്റ് കൊടുക്കാറില്ല, സത്യം പറഞ്ഞു ഇൻഡസ്ട്രീസ് മാത്രമാണ്.
I mean, I'm not saying that privatization doesn't provide any benefits. Privatization provides benefits, and that benefits disproportionately goes towards the people in the top 1%. That's a problem here. There is this trickle-down economics theory. Like, if Elon Musk is rich, that amount will trickle down to people who are living in the lower quintile of the economic class. But actually, that didn't happen. This theory has been promoted in the 1980s by Ronald Reagan. When it's 1980, so it's almost 50 years, almost 50 years. That hasn't happened. That hasn't trickled down yet. My point here is, it's not total privatization. It's there are public-private partnership. I mean that works perfectly well. I mean, but the thing is that if the profit, whatever profit that's derived from those private initiatives, like for example water or energy or healthcare sector, if that benefits only that corporation alone by denying benefits to the people who are in the lower quintile of the population, I mean that is problematic. That's an ethical concern. That's a moral concern. I mean, it should be redistributed, equitably distributed to people who belong to every class. That's my point. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and share my thoughts with you. Thanks again to Baiju sir, Loyola College of Social Sciences, and ECOR Foundation, and for providing me with this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Johnny. And the next speaker, Ilan Kalman, is here, and power to Jishnu.
Hi everyone. Our first keynote session with our chief guest, Dr. Johnny Augustine, is already completed offline. Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable insights. Now, moving forward, it's my great pleasure to introduce our second distinguished speaker, Dr. Ilan Kelman, Professor of Disaster and Health at University College London and Professor second at the University Agder, Norway. Dr. Kelman's works span as public health, risk studies, climate change, and disaster diplomacy, and bridging science, policy, and practice on global scale. He is also the author of acclaimed book Disaster by Choice: How Our Action Turned Natural Hazards into Catastrophe. In this powerful and thought-provoking work, Dr. Kelman challenges the very idea of natural disaster, arguing that disasters are not natural. They are the result of human choices, vulnerability, and failures in policy and planning. Hazards like earthquake, flood, and storm only become disaster when they meet human systems that are unprepared, unequal, or neglected. Today, he will speak on the topic disaster by choice, why disasters are not natural. This session will explore how environmental injustice, development decisions, and societal inequality shape disaster outcome and how proactive, equitable choices can reduce or even prevent catastrophe. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ilan Kelman.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. The sad reality is that disasters happen everywhere. It is ongoing. You must be aware of what has happened in the northwest of India and surrounding areas in the past weeks in terms of these devastating floods which have killed hundreds of people. And this is why, when we see this all the time, we want to know, why do disasters happen? And how can we stop them and save lives? So it is wonderful to see you all here. Thank you so much to the organizers for the opportunity. Please do connect. Please do stay in touch so that we can continue to learn from each other. It does not stop here. For those online, I've put my contact details into the chat. For those in the room, please just do a search on my name and you can find me to really ask this question: why do disasters happen? And more to the point, how can we stop them? So yes, floods in India, heat in India, and heat in London at the moment, even though it's 7 a.m., it's still very hot because it's simply the temperatures are increasing. And of course, tsunamis in India, and earthquakes in India, and cyclones in India. In fact, thinking about earthquakes, let me cast your mind back to the 11th of March 2011, when one of the biggest earthquakes ever recorded rocked the north part of Japan. In fact, the earthquake was so enormous that high-rises in Tokyo were swaying back and forth hundreds of kilometers away. But that was actually good news. The high buildings were designed to sway back and forth in an earthquake, because if they didn't, then they would collapse. Thousands would have been killed. Instead, many people got seasick, but there was no real disaster involving an earthquake because Japan, for generations, had built their infrastructure and developed their society to know they have huge earthquakes. And so they were ready for it, being able to deal with the shaking. We should be celebrating the 11th of March 2011 as a massive success in exactly how we can stop disasters happening no matter what nature does. But of course, pity about the tsunami. Over 15,000 people died. Japan was ready for earthquakes, but not for tsunamis. So what is a disaster? Why does this happen? I visited 3 years after the earthquake and looked around and discovered that, in fact, of course, there's now plenty of signs about evacuating because of a tsunami. It's interesting. This is almost like a person is trying to jump into a portal rather than running away. It's also interesting I don't speak or read any Japanese, but they've very conveniently put it in English. So that helps me. And for people who cannot read, for people who don't know English or Japanese, in fact, problems are being created for them, not for any reason of their own, but because decisions were made to pick particular languages. It's also interesting, look at the direction in which the evacuation route is, straight into the electricity wires. In an earthquake, well, the earth shakes, that's why it's called an earthquake, power lines come down. If the power is not turned out, then it's telling people to evacuate straight into live power lines, which are bouncing around and moving around. But of course, Japan is ready for earthquakes. And so maybe they have an automatic power shutoff. Certainly, we know that the very fast trains, the bullet trains, and the nuclear power plants shut down automatically upon receiving a major seismic signal. So maybe the power does go out. And maybe it's actually okay to evacuate in that way. It's sort of now saying, well, what is a disaster? The disaster is not that I do not speak Japanese because they've told me in English. If the power goes out, that evacuation route works. If the power does not go out, that evacuation route does not work. And earthquakes show us this all the time. On the 22nd of December 2003, a moderate earthquake, fairly shallow, rocked Central California. Typical and usual. It wasn't a huge disaster. In fact, only 2 people died. Why did they die? Because when the earth started shaking, they ran outdoors. The building they were in had not been retrofitted according to the law, so a clock tower on top collapsed onto them and killed them. So first, if that building had adhered to the building codes, the clock tower would not have collapsed. Second, in an earthquake, you're not meant to run outside. You drop, cover, and hold. So go to the ground, try and find something which is stable and secure like a table, get underneath and hold on. That's premised on the fact that the infrastructure will stand up. In California and Japan, we expect it will do, although not necessarily. There's one test which counts, and that's the earthquake. So although it was absolutely tragic that 2 people died, they shouldn't have died for many reasons. No real disaster. 4 days later, 26 December 2003, a very similar earthquake in terms of magnitude, intensity, and depth rocked southern Iran. 25,000 people died, and a World Heritage City was destroyed. Drop, cover, and hold would not have helped much in that earthquake in Iran. One earthquake, not a disaster. The other earthquake, a major international calamity. Similar earthquakes. So what's the difference? What is a disaster? It's clearly not the earthquake. In fact, these examples prove what earthquake engineers and community workers say all the time. Earthquakes do not kill people. Collapsing infrastructure does. It's sort of the trivia question, right? How many people throughout human history have died because of earthquakes? How many people throughout human history have died because of earthquakes? The answer, of course, is 0. No one has died because of earthquakes. Unfortunately, hundreds of thousands of people have died because of collapsing infrastructure. But what is the disaster when it's not the earthquake, when it's not what nature does? Well, you can imagine what academics are like. They write papers and books called What is a Disaster? And there's a long list. Of course, there's legislation. Many countries have the right to declare a straight state of emergency, or states or provinces or territories or cities, so they have to define what is an emergency. And then dictionaries. They define the words. Of course, English has many synonyms: emergency, disaster, crisis, calamity, catastrophe. Think about all the languages you speak and consider these words, whether or not they translate. consider whether the differences and the words disaster and emergency in English mean something different to you in the other languages. So we have all these possibilities, all these challenges to understand, but what is a disaster? It's not the earthquake. We can be ready for that. It's not the tsunami. We can be ready for that. And we saw that on the 30th of July this year with, again, an absolutely massive earthquake, one of the top ones ever recorded off the coast of Kamchatka in Russia. Huge trans-Pacific tsunami. I cannot find any reports of deaths from that tsunami. Because a warning went out, people trusted it, they believed it, millions evacuated as waves of up to 5 meters came in. So what is a disaster? Well, I decided to do the opposite of what most academics do. So rather than using big words and long sentences, I thought, what is the fewest number of words in English that I could use to define a disaster? And the fewest that I could come up with was 7. A situation requiring outside support for coping. Something happens, we cannot deal with it, we require someone else to assist. Now, of course, there's vagueness. I mean, what does it mean by situation? What exactly is coping? When we have a COVID-19 pandemic, which affects the entire Earth, are we expecting aliens, extraterrestrials to come and help us? So, of course, whenever we're communicating, there's vagueness. What I found with this, and a lot of feedback, and your feedback is important too, is that this definition is communicable, fairly intuitive, translates well to other languages and cultures, and does make a large degree of sense because it works at the individual level. I may have a problem like crashing my car, and I need the emergency services to help me, or again, it can be global like a pandemic, or like a volcanic eruption cooling the climate, and we need to help each other. Also, notice how wording makes a difference. Something clearly went wrong in this photo, and people responded, they helped, it could have been much worse. They've labeled it an accident. Given that we can stop people dying, given that we can maintain cars so mechanical failures do not happen, given that we can drive properly so that we don't end up crashing our car, is anything really an accident? Although I actually took this photo in Geneva, so it's in French, accident, rather than accident, and the English word accident has a different connotation to the French word accident, so maybe it is actually an accident. Still, irrespective of these discussions, this says straightforwardly what a disaster is. It does not explain why disasters happen. We know rainbursts and flash floods happen in Kashmir. This is not new. And yet still in 2025, it is devastation. So why disasters happen? Get to the challenging parts. And it's really 2 main words, which we use frequently, to explain that a disaster arises because hazard and vulnerability combine. Now, we understand these words intuitively. Hazard, well, if we're talking about the environment, I've mentioned many earthquakes, floods, storms, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions. It's something that nature does. Again, think about all the languages you speak and determine whether or not you can translate hazard into it. I can get by, I can work in 3 other languages. None of them have the word hazard. Given those other languages, I have sort of conversational facility or general reading facility in about 4 or 5 other languages. None of them have a word hazard. Vulnerability is more common and does translate well in many contexts. It's basically saying something has happened to make people be unable to deal with this so-called hazard. So if we look at this photo, which I took in Northern England and Yorkshire, the issue is not that it rained a lot and an underground river rose. Climate change, human-caused climate change, likely exacerbated the rainfall, likely made it more intense. But that's just rain. That's just flood. That's just a river. Of course it rains. Of course we get floods. Of course rivers rise. The key, the disaster, is that a house was built over this underground river without taking flood resistance measures. And that's why people are out of home. People are stressed, there is damage, they have to deal with their insurance, they have to clean up, there may be mold. That is a disaster. The disaster is actually the vulnerability. In fact, if that house were not there, the rain and the flood and the river are not even a hazard. So when it's a peculiar word, which doesn't translate well to languages and cultures, when the word hazard doesn't actually mean a lot, and when we cannot have a hazard without actually people being there, without vulnerability, maybe these two terms are a bit too complicated, and we should simply say disaster is vulnerability. We are poor, so we cannot afford insurance, or we cannot afford flood resistance measures, or we cannot afford earthquake resistance measures. That's vulnerability. The government spent money on the military rather than building a bridge across the river. So when it rains a small amount, the kids can't get to school, their education is impeded, they don't have job opportunities, and they don't know how to interpret environmental information around them. That is vulnerability. We heard from the earlier discussion how philanthropists managed to avoid, and rich people managed to avoid paying taxes. So maybe the government couldn't even afford that bridge across the river or funding the military. That's vulnerability. You know, it's fine to say, well, my neighbors down the street, they saw the local town council and the mayor taking money, corruption, for building houses in the floodplain without flood resistance measures. So they went down to the public meeting and they called out the corruption. They challenged the mayor to stop this. And that evening they were shot. That is vulnerability. Long-term societal process. Long-term political process. Removing choices from people. Inhibiting them from helping themselves and others. Telling them that your kids don't deserve school, or you don't deserve health care, or if you raise your voice, I'm going to kill you. It is people with political power, money, other resources and opportunities telling other people that they should not be able to deal with the hazards. They should not be able to deal with the environment. Rain is just rain. If you have an umbrella, it's not a problem to deal with the rain. Oh, and I guess I need a new umbrella since this one is falling apart. But you know, that's fine. If I want an umbrella which is 20 euros or 200,000 rupees, not a big issue. I can go out and get an umbrella. I don't know why I'd want an umbrella for 200,000 rupees, but I can do it because I'm privileged. I have the resources. Not everyone can do that. Not everyone can afford an umbrella or has access to real-time information to tell them that rain is coming, so they should seek shelter. Or they may receive the warning. They may know exactly what to do. They may say, actually, yeah, you know, there's a tornado coming. It's touched down. It's going to be here in 20 minutes. I need to take shelter. But if they leave their assembly line in their factory, they get fired. And that has happened in the US a few times, where a clear major tornado warning was issued. People wanted to take shelter. They were told to stay in their factory, and they were killed. It's nothing to do with the tornado. It doesn't matter how human-caused climate change is affecting tornadoes, and we actually don't know. It's rather complicated. But it's vulnerability. It's that choice to place people in a situation where they had the information, They trusted it. They knew exactly what to do. They were willing to do it. They had time, and they were told no. Long-term social political process. Vulnerability. Or discrimination, oppression, marginalization, injustice, inequity, inequality. We have all these words. And again, try translating them, think of the connotations, consider different meanings. The key is that some people are making choices for other people, so that the other people end up in situations where they need outside support for coping. Back to the definition of disaster. If they weren't in that position of poverty, of injustice, of marginalization, of oppression, if they weren't in that position, they wouldn't need outside support for dealing with weather. It's as they say, there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. And if you can afford good clothing, it's just weather. That's why hazard may be irrelevant for disaster. It really is answering the question, why do people and places end up in situations where they require outside support for coping? We can also answer this question through examples which have worked. It's so easy, and of course we do it all the time. This is a disaster, this was terrible, people died, livelihoods were disrupted. But what can we do? What should we do? And this is actually where we have compiled many examples of disasters which did not happen. We call this project Disasters Avoided. And you can see it there, disastersavoided.com. So if anyone has examples where people took action and therefore disasters did not happen, please let us know. We are compiling examples. We have a theoretical idea of the factors which go into making people to decide to avoid disasters, and we'd be delighted for your input. Sometimes it is long-term. Remember, vulnerability happens over the long term. It's not overnight. So we can think about, for example, all the way back to ancient history, back to 1954, when Hurricane Hazel slashed through Ontario in Canada. Over 80 people died in the province, 1/3 of them along a single street in Toronto, that street called Raymore Drive. It rained a lot, well, it's a hurricane. The river rose, it flooded people out of home and swept their homes away. Firefighters were trying to rescue them, but could not reach them because of the flooding and just had to listen to their screams, which eventually faded away. Raymore Drive in Toronto, a death trap in 1954. Today, Raymore Drive looks like this. You can see the river over here. In the aftermath of the 1954 Hurricane Hazel disaster, Toronto, as part of wider municipal governance changes, said we cannot let this happen again. They changed the rivers into parkland with beautiful walking and cycling paths where you can walk your dog, you can enjoy a picnic. There are playgrounds, they have environmental education. Rather than rebuilding houses in the floodplain, they made the floodplain a floodplain, because that's what a floodplain is meant to be. It's meant to be a floodplain, which is why we call it a floodplain. I guess there is some logic in this. Rivers do not burst their banks. Rivers cover the floodplain when it rains a lot. And this is not just theory. It's not just saying, well, now Toronto is wonderful, right? It's a green city. They market it as a city within a park. This happened in reality. So 2012, Hurricane Sandy went through Toronto. I went out afterwards to try to find possible damage. And the worst damage that I could find after Hurricane Sandy was this. So yeah, the rivers rose, mud covered the paths. Some trees went down, some fences had to be fixed. This bridge was definitely muddy. But there was no real disaster. because the floodplain behaved like a floodplain. No one was living there. There were no houses. This is a disaster avoided. I live in London. This is one part in South London where the local government specifically said that they wanted the low-lying part to become a floodplain. So they marked it off as a green area. They built a playground. There's a playing field. There's benches. There's a nature area to promote bird life. And when it rains a lot, it gets flooded. Not a big issue, right? There's no real damage. And it's a lot better than this house being flooded. That house in the background. If that house had maybe a couple of centimeters of water, because you can see it's not that deep, but if this house had a couple of centimeters of water, we're looking at maybe 6 figures in terms of euros or dollars of damage. People will not be able to live there for 6 to 9 months. That even if it's only their house, to them that's a disaster. Instead, the playground got wet, kids enjoyed the puddles. This is what it looks like when it's dry. So yeah, it's a bit muddy, but kids love mud. Not a big issue. It rains a lot. They thought in advance, they've dealt with it. It's a disaster avoided. Again, rain is not the issue. The hazard is not the issue. There's no such thing as bad rain, only bad ways of dealing rain, or there's no such thing as bad earthquakes, only bad infrastructure. We make those choices. We have the money. We see how much goes to military and corruption. We see how much is spent and wasted. So it's our choice how we deal with that. It's our choice how we allocate the funds, which is where very kindly you mentioned the book Disaster by Choice. People are making choices to create disasters. Typically making choices for others, forcing choices on others in order to create disasters for them. So suddenly they need outside support for coping. Suddenly we spend a lot of money on disaster relief and humanitarian aid, when actually it would have been much cheaper to stop the disaster in the first place. You know, it's the usual, prevention is better than cure, which is why we so rarely do it. But in this world where we talk money, yes, prevention is better than cure. Prevention is actually cheaper than cure. We save money. So in the world we have where we value monetary resources, we should be stopping disaster. You know, who cares about people? Who cares about lives? We should be stopping disasters to save money. So let's make those choices in order to save money and then also saving lives by avoiding disasters. This book, by the way, is also available in German. Doesn't really help me because I don't speak German. But it's not available in any Indian languages. So if someone wants to take it and translate it, then there may always be an option to try to get it out beyond sort of the usual English bias. And the ethos is what we can and should do. The ethos is that disasters are a purely human construct. It's up to us to stop them. Fundamentally, the phrase natural disaster does not make sense. Simply do not use the phrase natural disaster. Just call them disasters, that's what they are, and explain why they happen, because we make choices to kill people. Disasters are not natural, they do not come from nature. It's up to us. Because of this, there is no such thing as a rapid onset disaster. There is no such thing as a disaster which happens quickly or swiftly. It's about planning, it's about building codes, it's about education, it's about healthcare, it's about social services. Those do not happen quickly. Vulnerabilities are a long-term social and political process deliberately built up and accrued. Since disaster is vulnerability, all disasters happen slowly. Which means that the phrase disaster event is as bad as a phrase natural disaster. Disasters are not natural, disasters are not events. Disasters are societal constructs. Disasters are social processes. Disasters are choices. And like that photograph at the beginning from Japan, with a very simple sign, with its advantages and limitations, we can make very simple choices to say, look, nature does things like a flash flood. Therefore, be ready, be aware, and be prepared. Of course, this sign presumes that people can read and understand English, and it also presumes that people have the ability to climb, particularly if there's no paved areas or there's no other forms of support. When we take measures, remember who is included and who is excluded, so that we make a decision and work with everyone to help ourselves and everyone to ensure that disaster by choice becomes no disaster by choice. Thank you.
If any of the participants have any doubt or comment, please feel free to share them.
I look forward to your questions, your thoughts.
Yeah. Hello, Professor. Myself Jishnu from ECOA, and it's a great pleasure to have you again in our platform. So, actually, I have a few questions for you. The first thing is you were discussing and telling about the definitions of disaster, right? And when I check about, because I'm not a expert in the disaster, I'm just a marine biologist. So when I check about the definitions, the most of the times I found that it is mostly on the human perspective, or when it's affect the human, then it is a disaster. So is it a time to rethink or redefine the disasters by including the wildlife or not?
Absolutely. This is one discussion which is ongoing, and I can put in the chat one example of that for those who are not on the chat. I'll see if I can bring that up. So much of this, exactly as you're saying, is from the human perspective. This is also a major problem in climate change, because the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, actually defines justice as being only humans. It is human-centric, and that is really unacceptable, which is why we are trying to explore those, so those who are not in the chat can now see this paper, to consider how animals and habitats, so not species focus, but the whole range of biotic and abiotic components, how they enter into disasters and what a disaster means. We're doing a lot of work with people in this context in terms of trying to understand the philosophy of what's called the more than human. So basically everything around us, living and non-living, which is part of our environment. New Zealand has a law which says that a specific river has all the rights, duties, and obligations of people. They have conferred personhood onto a river. They have made a river a person. What does this mean legally? What does this mean morally? What does this mean for disasters? We're exploring this. If a river floods, if this river floods and kills people, could it be taken to court for manslaughter? If a landslide, if an earthquake, New Zealand has earthquakes, if an earthquake generates a landslide which blocks a river, that's perfectly natural. Is that a disaster for the river or not? When a beaver builds a dam across a river, should the beaver be criminally charged for harming that river? Is the dam, the beaver dam, a disaster for the river? Or is it just human dams that are disasters for river? Fire is a perfectly normal, natural, and typical ecosystem process. Many species, many ecosystems would not exist without regular fire. Is fire hazardous? Is it a disaster when it kills animals and kills plants? You're absolutely right. Is a disaster only a human construct because we value certain aspects like nature, like species, because it affects us? Can more than human entities experience disaster? And we don't know. As a marine biologist, Jishnu, what do you think? What would be your answer?
Yeah, Professor, actually, it is complicated. That's what I can say because the one who is making the problem is mostly the human, and yeah, about the beaver and all, they are in the flow of the nature, so we cannot criminate them anyway. That's the one point, and yeah, as your book says, disaster is always a choice by the human. Yeah, that's what I think. And we can also we can only or act because they cannot act properly, the animal. But yeah, that's my point. Yeah.
Excellent. So there's a wonderful question in the chat, which I will read out. As I mentioned, prevention is cheaper. But how do we convince governments to invest in something where there is no quantifiable result? If a disaster is avoided, how do we trace a result of how effective it is? I entirely support your view, but I was wondering how we could pool in resources and convince authorities to take action if they cannot display it or quantify it. That is a question. We do not have answers. What we can offer is in democracies we have choices. By virtue of being in the room, we are privileged. It is up to us. In democracies, governments are us. And yet, of course, we can complain about the electoral system, we can talk about corruption, we can say how the morally good people tend to be punished by the political system. I mean, that's all fair. Nonetheless, we can speak out. We can stand for office. We can support and canvass for candidates who support the idea of stopping disasters. The other option is actually just show them the evidence. Say, well, actually, do you want more money? Well, then stop disasters. So we've compiled extensive examples of cost-benefit analyses of choosing no disaster and the money saved. And most politicians, if we go to them and say, actually, if you do this, you save this amount of money, then that will, to a large extent, convince them. It may also be mobilizing the population to say no more disasters, this is unacceptable. And so the politicians have to respond to that population. The display and the quantification, though, which is the second part of the question, can be harder, particularly when it's beyond money. And the answer is let's do the research. This is why we have disastersavoided.com. This is why we took the benefit cost analysis approach. No one really likes ascribing monetary values to lives, livelihoods, and lifestyles. It quantifies. No one necessarily wants that simple graphic to say, look, that trend. But it works. We do know that overall, in most circumstances, disaster deaths are going down. We also know that certain groups are being more affected than others. That's quantification, that's displaying. It does hide the key point of why disasters happen and who caused them. It may start the conversation. Does it work? Should we be doing this? Again, we need to test this. These are open research questions about how best to communicate, how best to convince decision makers, how to show the generally declining trend in disaster deaths without making people complacent. How do we convince people to make those decisions to save money or to save lives or for the morals of it? They are open questions. Keep on asking them. Work with us to help find the answers.
Hello, Professor. Actually, my next questions might be quite out of the box, but I have to ask you
Please,
because Yeah, you know that in the marine ecosystems we have the oil spills and all, and similarly now we have a big issue of the plastic. And the recently UN is planning to have the UN, treaty on the plastics. So, in your opinion, whether this kind of treaty can make an impact in the real world, or just will be like intergovernmental organizations and treaty it will go like that? Because you have an expertise in this field for a long period of time, and maybe you can give some opinion whether it will work properly or not. Because sometimes this kind of treaties will be eliminated or will be removed by some particular countries. They will say at some point, okay, we don't want it. So how we can address it globally? And even though we are planning for this kind of treaty, will it work properly or not? Why I asked that question is recently I go through the social media like LinkedIn, and I found one interesting article in which they says about 90% of the UN reports and recommendations are not following by anyone. So, so how it is going to work?
Yes, that was a fascinating report. The UN issued a report saying that 90% of the reports are not read. I did actually read that original report, and I thought that's a very strange report to do. Pollution is a disaster. Plastics, as you mentioned, oil spills, as you mentioned, the chemicals in our air, in our water, in our land, noise pollution, light pollution. One subset of air pollution are greenhouse gases, and they are absolutely clear evidence that disasters are long-term. In terms of the plastic treaty, it has not gone well. Just a few days ago, they adjourned the talks without any agreement. So this is from the 15th of August when they decided to stop the talks, but those talks will continue. Do these international treaties make a difference? So again, it's up to us, just like with our governments. The international treaties, international environmental agreements, in theory, are for us. So it's up to us. If you don't want plastic in the ocean, don't throw plastic into the ocean. Recycle it or put it in a bin. Even better, we're well aware of the various phrases. One common one is reduce, reuse, recycle. Don't use plastic where possible. Reduce. Where we have to use plastic, reuse. You know, this umbrella has a lot of plastic. It's no longer usable as an umbrella, so I use it as a prop for presentations rather than just throwing it out or throwing it into the ocean. And then if we absolutely have to, sort of final option being recycle, because recycle does take a lot of energy. It does cost a lot. So it's up to us. We do not need an international plastics treaty to reduce and reuse and recycle our plastic. If we feel our governments are not negotiating properly, or we feel they are breaking an international environmental agreement, it goes back to what I said before. Oil spills are an excellent example. If we want our governments to have far more safety for fossil fuels, then it's up to us to demand it. There are also different mechanisms. When ships go into the Arctic and the Antarctic, there are major concerns that the captains do not understand the weather, ice, and sea conditions, and that the ships cannot deal, particularly with hitting ice or with the conditions they experience. Driven by the private sector, particularly insurers, in 2017, a UN agency called the International Maritime Organization implemented the Polar Code, which sets out the technical specifications for ships going into Arctic or Antarctic waters. And it's actually insurers who will say if your ship is not up to the standard of the Polar Code, you are not insured for going into the Arctic and the Antarctic. It is not stopping ships who are not ready from going into those locations. What it does do is provide a mechanism to try and monitor, enforce, but particularly avoid disasters. Because it's saying, yeah, of course I'll insure you, but here's the regulations you have to follow. And in fact, it's not governments which necessarily do it, it's the insurance companies. Governments were part of it through the UN agency, through the International Maritime Organization, but it was the insurers themselves who made that decision. So here's a way of involving governments without waiting on them. And it does mean that if you're going on an Antarctic cruise or an Arctic cruise, you as a privileged consumer can actually say, does the ship adhere to the polar code? If not, I'm not giving that company my money. So there are ways. And the question then, if you do have to buy fossil fuels, I mean, I don't own a car. I've never owned a car. I don't even have a driver's license. If you do have to buy fossil fuels, then you may want to ask, how is it extracted? How is it shipped? Are the ships up to standard? Are you dealing with the huge pollution which comes out of the shipping industry? So you as a consumer have those options. Or also lobbying government, lobbying the private sector, lobbying the insurers to try and ensure that any ship transporting fossil fuels is managed, maintained, and monitored appropriately. Another question in the chat. I was reading the critique of the Sendai Framework. So the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction is a voluntary international agreement. It was signed in 2015, it goes to 2030, and it lays out what country responsibilities should be for disaster risk reduction. It is voluntary and it is self-monitored. So it's not quite an international agreement. It's really a framework to try and encourage countries to avoid disasters. So a question. I was reading the critique of the Sendai Framework, and many researchers point to the strength and lack of community-based participation in disaster risk reduction. As much as disaster risk reduction should be a bottom-up approach, learning from indigenous knowledge, traditional solutions, and more, isn't disaster risk reduction an increasingly expert-driven, top-down process due to lack of resources, exposure, and capabilities of the local communities? Locals are first responders, so please share your views on this. Well, the answer is, yeah, disaster risk reduction has become an industry. In my talk, you notice I did not use the phrase disaster risk reduction deliberately, because it's a technical term which has been appropriated and misappropriated by exactly what you say, expert-driven, top-down, who then drain resources from the locals who really understand it. By compartmentalizing, by saying, well, I'm an expert and I know about disaster risk reduction, and let me use big words and long sentences to confuse you so that you no longer know, we are creating the problem. In the same way that I'm trying to move away from using the word hazard, and I do not really in this context use the word disaster risk reduction, the experts are the people living. It's all of us. Yeah, I'm an expert, you're an expert. Jishnu said, well, I don't know about disasters, but actually, Jishnu, you do. You're an expert because you live and you have to deal with it. The whole making it a sector, making it a silo, making it a technical approach with technical vocabulary is the problem. We've known since the beginning of contemporary disaster risk science that local approaches are best. And yet, you mentioned indigenous knowledge and traditional solutions, vernacular, local. Not all of it is perfect. Many indigenous knowledges are highly damaging. Many local traditional vernacular approaches are dangerous. They do not work. The point is to draw on everyone's expertise to identify the gaps and the problems and fill them in with others. Of course, science is not perfect. Of course, our technology is not perfect. We see that every day. We do have a lot to offer, just as indigenous, local, vernacular, traditional approaches have a lot to offer. It's working together. And we know that doing so at the local level is the best starting point, we also still have to coordinate. I can do something in my area which causes problems for others. That's not good. So we do have to recognize the ripple effects and the wider effects, even while starting at the local level. And that's where the overview, the international, having people who really specialize in earthquake engineering or who really specialize in floodplain management or who really specialize in marine ecology, we need that. That's important. It's sort of depth and breadth, bringing them together in a T. It's mutual respect, accepting all the expertise. Exactly as you say, it's not just first responders, it's zero responders, people who are right there, and trying to ensure that everyone in every location has the option and opportunity to deal with the environment so that they do not need outside support for coping. International top-down processes are part of that. Even though the baseline is local bottom-up, it's not just top-down and bottom-up, but there's lots going on in the middle which needs to work out and filter. The real concern is exactly what you articulate, using phrases like disaster risk reduction, using the technical vocabulary which is in the Sendai framework, presuming that the so-called top-down international experts are the best, looking at the resources which they use, and producing all these reports for the UN, which no one reads and which don't do much. This is about us, again. This is about governance. Where you live, where you work, are you ready for major hazard? If suddenly, I mean, a lot of you are in India, in fact, most of you, if suddenly you get that earthquake, do you know where to drop, cover, and hold? Are you monitoring weather so you know when a cyclone is coming in and you know what to do, or maybe just a rainstorm? Do you wash your hands to try and avoid a pandemic and not touch food with your hands, for example? You know, when I see buffets at my university and I see people leaning over to look at the food, which means they're breathing on it, and I've seen them touch doorknobs and then they're grabbing their sandwich, I think, but you were my colleagues during COVID-19. All you have to do is like wash your hands and don't touch food. It starts with us. We need the specialties. We need the international mechanisms, but it is not to rely on them. And it is very much looking at all the work they do, which goes nowhere. And it's very much looking at what happens at my workplace and in my home. And it's very much saying, everyone is an expert. Let's bring us all together to avoid disasters. Or if you want, the three-letter acronym DRR, Disaster Risk Reduction.
Hello, am I audible?
Please, I can hear you.
Thank you, Professor Kelman, for your very insightful and articulative lecture. I'm Jyoti Krishnan. I'm speaking from Loyola College in Trivandrum. We have a department for MSW disaster management here. My question is, thank you very much for explaining how the concept of hazard is not necessarily very helpful, and also for emphasizing that vulnerability is actually related to long-term social and political processes. But when one looks at academic discourses, and as you mentioned, the large number of books that are published on disasters, there is this tendency to reduce disasters to that formula of hazard into vulnerability, in a way removing attention from vulnerability and depoliticizing disasters. So like as you mentioned, it's related to democracy. It's related to what decisions we take. So is this a larger agenda is there a larger agenda to depoliticize disasters? And is the academic community playing along with that tune? Because why are we producing research which is not paying enough attention to the social and political processes that aggravate vulnerability? This is especially in the South Asian and Indian context as well.
Absolutely brilliant. I don't think I could have expressed it better. Yes, we are complicit. And yes, it is a real challenge in order to try to overcome, particularly when we use the complicated words and we don't really admit the baselines. those in power have the incentive to depoliticize disaster. Well, yeah, I could have spent money helping you, but I wanted more in my bank and now you're dead. Well, it was a natural disaster. You know, we can't stop volcanic eruptions. We can't stop cyclones. What do you want me to do? So absolutely, you depoliticize it. And academics are often complicit in that. I mean, I know many leaders of academic organizations and academic institutions who say one thing and do another. They will not respond to those who try to constructively critique, and they simply perpetuate the problems which you articulated. Nonetheless, we have incredible privilege and incredible freedom as academics. So it's about respectfully and constructively calling out those who make those errors and try to improve. And that's the same with me. Of course, people point out mistakes I make, and they should, so that I can do better, so that I can improve. But where we do depoliticize, where we do complicate, where we do cause more problems than we solve, we have to change. I mentioned the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, earlier. I call out their mistake in their definition of justice. There are other, well, they have so many big mistakes, but another big one is they changed the definition of risk to be vulnerability, hazard, and exposure. Rather than two complicated terms, vulnerability and hazard, they made three complicated terms by adding exposure. I've asked many IPCC authors, oh, I'm puzzled about vulnerability and exposure. Can you define or differentiate them? Not a single one has ever been able to do that. I go to the glossary, I read the definitions, I don't understand the difference. So I call this out. Of course, it makes no difference, but it is absolutely ridiculous, and it is technocratizing, making it a technocracy, and depoliticizing by saying, let's add another complicated word. Let's add more complicated definitions. Disasters used to use adjustment, adjust to nature. The IPCC made it adaptation. I've asked people who did this, why did you take adjustment and change it to adapt? They think about it and say, I don't know, I can't really remember. It's a strange decision. The glossary currently is 6 different types of adaptation. I don't understand the difference. We are part of the problem, which means it's up to us to be the solution. Thank you for raising it. Absolutely brilliant expression. And please call me out when I make mistakes and constructively and respectfully tell your colleagues, let's do better. Let's stop depoliticizing. Let's stop making it complex. Let's stop making it a technocracy for our top-down experts as per the previous question. We can do better. It's up to us.
Thank you.
Thanks to you.
Hello, Professor. I think we have a few more people from Mahatma Gandhi University, as well as just like her from the Loyola College Toronto. And the students over there is doing their master's program as well as doing the PhD program in the disaster. So they can maybe ask you more questions closely related to disaster rather than me. That's what I believe. So if any one of them have questions, then we can open for a couple more minutes, right? Is that all right?
I'm all yours. Please challenge me.
Yeah, so if anyone have any questions from the students or the faculty members over there, please.
One question from.
Hi, I'm from second year sociology. So, I mean, I'm not very well versed in literature in this area, but just have this small doubt. You mentioned about plastics earlier, like reuse and recycle. Do you think the reusing and recycling plastics can actually reduce our consumption behavior around plastics?
Recycling is post-use. It makes a presumption that we should use, consume, and that we've done so. And then it requires immense effort, energy, and resources to collect the plastic or other materials, to separate them, and to recycle them. I do not see that recycling reduces or avoids consumption. Recycling reduces and avoids materials going straight to landfills or the oceans and taking up space. This is very much why reduce is sort of at the bottom. Recycle is at the bottom. It's first reduce, so don't consume. Then reuse, so consuming less. And then if you absolutely have to, recycle. There may be evidence out there to show that people are aware of reduce, reuse, recycle, and because it's a package, they are overall avoiding more consumption. People have probably studied this. There must be a lot of work to indicate what is happening. Still, fundamentally, of course, we should recycle when we have to, but fundamentally, recycling is about continuing consumption rather than reducing it. It does at least mean we're not just dumping things in the environment and leaving them there forever. But research it. Find out, how do we change people's behavior for the better? How can we better incorporate recycling with repurposing, reducing, reusing, regifting, and all the other actions that we should be doing to reduce consumption?
So we can't really reduce plastics, right? I mean, it's not really possible.
In what sense?
I mean, plastics are literally like, I mean, it's not just plastic covers, like everything is plastic. So it's not really possible to reduce using plastics, I mean, consuming plastics, right?
Well, there was a time when we didn't have plastics. Plastics come from fossil fuels. Plastics are the post-oil era. So before we had oil, we had a world without plastics. There are plenty of alternatives. As well, people are looking at plastic substitutes, which come from plants. So there's a whole field of research in what's called bioplastics, which could mean we have different types of materials. I mean, they're still plastic, but they're different types of materials which do not involve fossil fuels. We also know that fossil fuels are finite. They are a resource which must run out. So in the same way we had a world for millennia without plastics, eventually we must have a world without fossil fuel plastics. If we switch to bioplastics, one concern is then that land will be removed from food, for example, and changed into plastic production. So we still need to reduce and reuse. Nonetheless, bioplastics would be a major shift away from the plastics that we use. A world without plastics? We've had it before, and we must have it again by choice or by the end of the fossil fuel era. Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, Professor, you are absolutely right. Like recent years in Bangladesh, they were finding about some of the bioplastics, and I'm not sure whether they patented it or not. But at the beginning of their research, they got a lot of attentions internationally. But later, somehow, it's dipped in the water. So maybe because of the pressure from the global plastic players, I'm not sure. And maybe in the recent times, about the plastic, in the recent times, maybe the microplastics, when it's start to affect the human health, then we people start to think about it. And Professor, I have one more doubt. Now, like you mentioned about the Japan and the disasters in the Japan, and every time when there is a earthquake, the Japan is one of the vulnerable country, but they somehow manage to do it. So the system in Japan is quite well advanced in managing the disaster. So is it because they are learning from their childhood? because they have a habit of the cleanliness. They have also have the habit of studying how to deal with the disasters and all the risk that we are having in our daily life. So, in my opinion, I think every country could adapt that methodology to tackle the issue of the disaster at some point. So why our government or why our countries is failing it? Is it because of the people or is it because of the government? Actually,
Well,
people
government,
are the government. So
yeah,
what the saying?
exactly.
Yeah.
It's both together, they're not separate. And yes, on the 1st of September 1923, Tokyo had a major earthquake which led to a firestorm. Over 100,000 people died. It was from that disaster that Japan's culture of dealing with earthquakes emerged. Building codes, planning regulations, passing them, monitoring them, enforcing them, as well as you said, starting from an early age. From the youngest age in school, kids in Japan run earthquake drills. It's part of the culture. They expect their fast trains and their nuclear power plants to shut down when they're shaking. They know exactly, and the people know exactly what to do. So this is a long-term process, just as making vulnerability is long-term, reducing it is long-term. 1923, that's 102 years to create a country of infrastructure which withstands earthquakes, and it's 4 generations to create a culture, a society which withstands earthquakes. Having said that, the recent earthquake on the 1st of January actually killed a lot of people and major issues arose from that, so it's not perfect. Some people indicate that corruption and mafia-led construction is so prevalent in the big cities that they have been short-changing on the building, and when the next big earthquake hits Tokyo, there is going to be massive devastation and massive loss of life. Quite possible. In 1995, Japan was incredibly confident and was actually saying, look how well we are with earthquakes. And then on the 17th of January 1995, over 5,000 people were killed in Kobe in an earthquake. Part of that was actually because the building code had emphasized typhoons. So roofs were heavy, so they would stay on houses during typhoons. During the earthquake, the walls were weaker, so when they crumbled, the heavy roof destroyed the wall and crushed people. Also, a lot of gas pipes burst, leading to fires, which killed a lot of people. So despite working on it since 1923, 1995 was not a good news story. And that more recent earthquake on the east coast of Japan was also, it was okay. A lot of lives were saved, probably thousands, but still the death toll was unacceptable. And when the next big one hits Tokyo, we'll learn a lot. There's one test which counts. The key is still culture and education, and that government is us. And even places, for example, when we visited one school in Ecuador, this school sits in the shadow of an active volcano. And they're teaching the kids what a volcano is, what the signs are of a hazard, what they need to do, how to evacuate, so that they are well aware a volcanic eruption does not need to mean a disaster from that volcano. But then I looked around that school, and I'm not convinced that that construction would stand up in an earthquake. I'm also very worried that the classroom door opens inwards, because fire doors, evacuation routes should open outwards so that people do not pile up against the door when they're trying to get out and force it shut. If a door opens outwards and people pile up against it, then the door will open and people can get out. So this school has thought about that volcanic eruptions, but not necessarily about earthquakes or fires or other reasons to evacuate. Same with Japan in 2011, doing well in earthquakes, but not in tsunamis. So yes, it's cultural. It's from a young age to an old age, from cradle to grave. And it's up to us to ensure we have what we need from our governments, because governments are meant to serve us.
Okay, thank you, Professor. And I just want to add on something about the plastic because recently they have found some fungi from the Ecuadorian forest that can eat the plastic. And also from some marine environment, they are extracting the bacteria that can degrade the plastic. So that are the positive signs and that is the environment is giving us. So I think we have to use that opportunity to escape from the issue of the plastic from the marine ecosystems as well as from other environmental systems. Yeah, that's it, Professor. So I think there are no more questions, and maybe okay.
Oh, sorry, we
In
just got
chat.
one in the chat. Do we have a few minutes for me to address that?
Yes, definitely, Professor. No problem. Yeah.
There was the 2024 Wayanad floods in Kerala, India, were predicted and alerts were disseminated by the local authorities. But people refused to believe these alerts and did not evacuate in time. I also came to know that in Japan, the constitution does not permit government to mandate an evacuation. They can't force civilians out if they are unwilling. Yeah, absolutely. As you're saying, it is thought-provoking. It's understandable why sometimes people don't listen to an evacuation order. Do you trust your government? I certainly don't trust mine in the UK, so I will tend to find out my own information. And this is very much the challenge of the breakdown in trust between those in authority and those not in authority. Again, it's not necessarily new. If we think back to 100 years ago, or 150 years ago in the UK, women did not have the vote. Before 1947, the UK was telling India what to do and entirely unacceptable. Several hundred years ago, the UK did not even have a parliament. It was simply the rich elite making decisions. So it's understandable why we don't necessarily trust our government, especially when we see all the issues around how we are being governed. So when someone tells you to evacuate, maybe you don't want to. Maybe you're afraid people will break into your house and rob it. Maybe you're scared you will be assaulted in the shelter or as you are evacuating. Maybe the evacuation order came when your kids are at school and you would rather go and ensure your children are safe than go to a safe place yourself. All these are known. All these are dealt with in many places, and I have a long list of examples where they realize why people don't evacuate and they dealt with it, so now people evacuate. Choices. Disaster by choice.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Thank you for the answers, and maybe we can wind up the sessions because it's going to be around 1 hour, and maybe you have to go to the college as well. I think. What is the time now in UK, sir? 9:30
It's
or?
8, but no, I'll be working at home today.
Okay, no problem. Because here it's around 3 o'clock. I'm in Taiwan, so it's in 3 o'clock. So maybe we can wind up the sessions, and the session will be wind up by Amita. She's one of the state coordinator of ECHO Foundation, and over to you, Amita.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful presentation. Your talk has helped us to see disaster in a new way and understand how human choices play a big role in their impact. For anyone who would like to learn more, Dr. Kelman's well-known book, Disaster by Choice, How Our Action Turn Natural Hazards into Catastrophe, is available online. You can purchase for further reading. As we come to the conclusion of today's program, I would like to express our heartfelt gratitude on behalf of ECHO Foundation and our partner institution. I sincerely thank our two esteemed keynote speaker, Dr. Joni Agustin, who delivered an insightful session on environmental injustice under capitalism, and Dr. Ilan Kelman, who enlightened us with his talk on disaster by choice, why disasters are not natural. Thank you, sirs, for your valuable contributions. A special thanks also goes to Dr. Baiju Kea, Professor Member Syndicate and Dean of Faculty of Environmental and Atmospheric Science, Dr. Mahesh Mohan, Associate Professor and Director of School of Environmental Science, and Dr. Joyce K. Joseph, Faculty Member at Loyola College of Social Science, for their valuable presence and support. Finally, to all of you, the participants, scholars, and students, for your active presence and engagement. Let's today's discussion inspire us to move beyond reactive disaster response and toward a future rooted in justice and resilience and equity in the environmental policy. Thank you, and we look forward to see you at our upcoming events. All registered participants will receive a certificate of participant following the event.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah, thank you. So I hope maybe we can have more sessions in the future. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Love the opportunity. Please do connect. I'm always on email, so we'll stay in touch. And thank you for your amazing work.
Thank you, Professor.
Now we have activate